Today I'll be showing you 3 super easy options for painting your own watercolour gift cards. So you've got lots of options up your sleeve depending on what supplies you have. And as an added bonus, I'll show you how to create some gift tags, which is an awesome way to use up those practice paintings that you're not sure what to do with. So I'm using the supplies from my beginner's watercolour kit, a few different watercolour brushes, and I've got a range of watercolour paints, but today I'm actually just going to be using pink and orange. But you can use whatever colours you like. I've also got a reusable cloth for blotting and 2 jars of water, one for warm colours and one for cool colours. I'm also using the paper from my watercolour kit, a glue stick, and also a ruler that I forgot to film. And I've also got some plain cards and envelopes that I got from Kmart a while ago, and a big A3 sheet of watercolour paper as well for our gift tags. But you really don't need a giant piece of paper like that. I was just making heaps of gift tags. You can use any practice paintings. So one card, when it's folded in half, obviously as a card is the same size as half of our A5 sheet of paper. So I thought I'd just demonstrate that for you now so that you could see. And here's that big sheet of paper that I mentioned earlier as well. So first up, I'm painting straight onto my card. So these are just plain old cards. They're not made of watercolor paper, and I don't normally recommend painting on non-watercolor paper, just because regular paper can buckle and it doesn't really handle the water so well and all that stuff. But also at the same time, I really don't care, and I don't think you should care either. Just do whatever works for you. But just keep in mind that you won't be able to put quite as much water onto your non-watercolor cards because they can buckle and stuff like that. But if that does happen, wait until they are completely totally dry and then pop them under some really heavy books and they'll be flat again. Anyway, so what I'm doing is I'm painting a heap of pink circles across my page, and I'm adding a bit more water to my brush as I go, making those circles a bit more diluted. And then I'm doing the same thing with some orange. So I'm just painting basically circles, or actually they're honestly they're more like blobs with varying amounts of water on them. So some of them are really concentrated, some of them are really light. I just really was trying to create a kind of varied effect. So there's a heap of blobs, and some of them light, some of them are dark, and they are touching in a lot of cases so that the paint will sometimes bleed between the different blobs, and then you'll see that with some of the lighter blobs, the darker colors will bleed into them and that sort of thing. So it's actually an awesome warm-up activity and a great way to experiment with the colors in your palette. And I've chosen the orange and pink because I love those 2 colors and I love them together. I think that it still looks super festive, but you could choose red and green or just whatever color palette suits you, whatever floats your boat. So anyway, I'm just repeating this process all over the card, and some of the blobs are actually drying quicker than others, which means that when I paint next to and slightly over them, I also get a really cool layered effect. So this is actually an awesome activity to test out a heap of different watercolor techniques without even knowing it. And you can tell that all of my blobs are different sizes and shapes and whatever, and it still looks awesome. And I'll be popping mine under some heavy books once it's dry because it's a little bit warped. All right, so option 2 is painting directly onto watercolor paper. So I've got my watercolor paper from my kit here, and I'm just painting some stripes across the page. Pink again, just because I love pink, but I still feel like it's giving a Christmassy vibe, kind of like a candy cane vibe, but a pink rather than a red. So anyway, paint whatever you want all over your page. Doesn't matter, like it can be an abstract pattern, could be leaves, whatever, and then let it totally dry. And then once it's completely dry, you can pull the page out of the book if it's in a book or whatever, and fold it in half really gently, just gently pressing the midline, I don't know what you'd call it, and then use a ruler to score the edges. But you've got to make sure that that is really dry, otherwise you're going to smudge your painting. So there you've got your scored edge line thing, and you can make it into a card. So you've literally just turned your watercolor paper into a card. However, you can then rip it up. So I'm using the ruler to actually rip my painting in half, and I'm going to use one half to just stick directly onto a card. But the other half I'm going to actually tear around the edges to make it like deliberately ripped and messy looking. So it's going to be slightly smaller than the card. So the half of the painting that I'm not ripping up more is the perfect size. It's just the right size to stick directly onto my card, and it just sits on the front of the card, and it's just perfect. So I'm just gluing all over. This is where we turn from art to craft. No, I actually don't know the difference between art and craft. Anyway, just using our glue stick to stick the paper onto the card, and there you go. So just obviously leave it for a while to dry, to let the glue dry, make sure it's all lined up and everything. Just doesn't have to be perfect because there's no such thing as perfect, but close enough is good. Anyway, I'm going to actually repeat that process of scoring around the edges of my other piece of card to make it smaller and the edges ripped, obviously. So I actually want it to be like deliberately messy looking. So I am using the ruler, but I'm also kind of leaning into that messy, jagged edge look. The torn look. I want it to look torn is what I'm trying to say. And then I'm just going to glue that straight onto my card. And so it's sort of sitting in the middle of the card and it's kind of framed by the card itself, which I actually think looks really cool. And maybe it's my favorite out of the two options. And you could even do this on a colored card. That could look really cool. So these first two options really lean into like kind of abstract and patterns and that kind of thing. And actually you could use practice pieces and paintings from practicing along the way for those two options as well. You don't even have to paint something specifically. So option 3 does really lend itself well to using a whole actual piece of watercolor paper, which we kind of nearly did in the first option, but I wanted to show you what you could do with basically making your paper, your watercolor paper, last longer, stretch further, using one piece of A5 watercolor paper to make 2 cards rather than just the one. Anyway, I've done the same process of folding and scoring this piece of watercolor paper, and now I'm painting directly onto what will be the front face of the card, and I'm painting 3 big blobs. So they're kind of circles, let's just say, and they're going to be baubles. So the first one was pink again, and then I'm using my orange once again. I should have actually probably moved up to a larger brush just because I was using sort of a middle-sized brush, and it takes longer when you're using a smallish brush to paint something big. But anyway, 3 blobs, and then on my smallest blob, I've put more little blobs, little pink blobs, to kind of, I don't know, I just was experimenting with putting some dots on it. And then I used the tip of my brush to create the top of the bauble where the string or whatever will attach. So that's just kind of like some little rectangle-y shapes, and then some little ovals on top. And then as an embellishment, I painted 3 pink stripes just swooshing across that middle bauble. And I think they look really cool and effective. It was very impromptu and messy, and I love it. The messier, the better. And finally, our gift tags. Okay, so as I said, you don't need to paint something specifically for this. Really, you didn't for any of the cards, except for maybe the baubles, which are just super easy, just 3 blobs. And then an oval on top. And you could experiment with putting patterns on them or whatever, but you could even actually paint a pattern over the top of the baubles with some dry paint once the bottom layer of the blob has dried. But anyway, our gift tags, you don't need to paint anything specific for this, but I just did just to show you another example of a sort of abstract thing that you can do. So it's the same sort of concept as earlier, just painting some big stripes, and you'll see that they're very imperfect. Some bits are dark with concentrated paint, some bits are really light with diluted paint, with more water on my brush. And I did the first lot of stripes, I forgot the word stripes. I did the first lot of stripes in orange, and then I'm painting some more in pink right up close, so they're going to be touching the orange stripes. And I'm doing this over and over again over the page. Again, maybe I could have even done with a bigger brush, but this is fine. I'm just a bit lazy. So I painted these pink stripes right up next to the orange ones and just filled in the whole page with pink and orange stripes, just experimenting with different amounts of dilutedness of the paint, brightness and darkness. What are words? So some of the stripes are dark, some of them are light, and all of that sort of thing. And the same sort of deal as with our blobs on our very first card. When I have wet paint next to wet paint, sometimes the paint is going to bleed and flow from one stripe to another, and then the opposite, if like the stripe is dry, then it will be a bit layered. And then I grabbed some really wet paint on my brush and did some drips just for fun to experiment. So then I did the same thing once again, folding up. This is once it was totally dry and my fairy lights got in the way. Once the painting was totally dry, I folded it up and scored along the edges with my ruler once again, folding it smaller and smaller, and so on. And then I tore along those edges to create small pieces of paper that were almost entirely covered in paint. From there, you could either use these gift tags. So I ripped it down to tore it down to A5, but I then went even smaller. So that's A6. Oh my goodness. And then I just freehand ripped the edges to make them even messier than before. And I punched a hole in one of them and put a ribbon through that just as an experiment to show you what to do or what you could do. But my preference is actually just to write someone's name on the tag without the hole and without the ribbon, and then use a piece of washi tape to stick it on a gift. In fact, I've been using mine in my watercolor kits that I've been selling for Christmas because I've got an awesome promotion happening. I've put together a mini course. If you buy a watercolor kit for Christmas by the 10th December, you get the course for free. Complimentary watercolor course with your kit. And the kit is a perfect present either for you or someone else. You'll be painting Christmas trees, gingerbread folk, and Christmas puddings. Will has made a gingerbread baking video so that you can make your own gingerbread and have a cup of tea while you paint.